She heard them laugh. Every single day for 8 months. Cargo girl can't even look at the cockpit without shaking. They didn't know what happened in Kandahar. They didn't know why she'd been grounded. They didn't know her call sign used to make Taliban fighters scatter. All they knew was she loaded crates and never talked back. That changed at 8,000 feet when the RPG hit, and she had 4 seconds to decide. Stay cargo or become a pilot again. Before we continue, tell us in the comments from which city in the world are you watching this video today. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, hit that subscribe button. The mission brief came at 10:30 p.m. on a cold November night at Forward Operating Base Atlas in southern Turkey. The operations room smelled like stale coffee and stress. Captain Marcus Trent stood at the front, pointing to satellite imagery projected on the wall. Havoc 2-1, a UH-60 Mike model Blackhawk helicopter under his command, would extract 12 personnel from a compromised safe house 42 kilometers inside Syrian territory. The coordinates placed them deep in hostile airspace where American helicopters were priority targets. Wheels up at 02:15 hours. Flight time, 38 minutes each way. Extraction window, 6 minutes. Weather clear. Moon phase new. Total darkness. Simple on paper. Deadly in practice. First Lieutenant Owen Marsh, Trent's co-pilot, sat in the front row reviewing approach vectors. He was young, confident, 27 years old with 41 combat missions logged. Behind him, Staff Sergeant Cole, the flight engineer, checked fuel calculations and weight distribution. These were the people who mattered. The pilots. The essential crew. And then, almost invisible in the back corner of the room, sat Specialist Elara Voss. Her hands rested on her knees, hidden beneath black tactical gloves. Beneath the fabric, burn scars covered both palms and most of her fingers. Pink tissue, shiny and tight, a permanent reminder of what happened 8 months ago in Kandahar. Nobody looked at her during the briefing. Nobody asked for her tactical assessment. She was cargo crew. Her job was to load equipment, secure medical supplies, stay quiet, and stay out of the way. For 8 months, 2 weeks, and 4 days, that's exactly what she'd done. At 11:15 p.m., the briefing ended. Trent gathered his notes. Marsh made a joke about Syrian anti-aircraft capabilities. Cole laughed. Voss stood and walked out silently. In the hallway, 2 junior pilots passed her. "There goes cargo," one of them muttered. "Can you believe she used to fly?" the other responded. "I heard she froze up." "Just lost it mid-flight. Shouldn't be anywhere near a cockpit." Their voices faded down the corridor. Voss kept walking. Her quarters were small. A bunk, a locker, a mirror she avoided looking at. She sat on the edge of the bed and removed her gloves slowly. The scars looked worse under fluorescent light. She remembered the fire, the smoke, the screaming. The controls melting in her hands as the Blackhawk went down in Kandahar. She remembered dragging her crew chief out of the wreckage while her hands burned. She remembered the hospital, the surgeries, the medical board, the determination that she was psychologically unfit for flight duties. Not because of the scars, because of what happened after. The nightmares. The panic attacks. The way her hands shook whenever she heard rotor blades. So they'd reassigned her. Cargo specialist. Ground crew. Load equipment. Stay useful. Stay invisible. She pulled her gloves back on and lay down. Sleep wouldn't come. It never did before missions. At 1:45 a.m., she walked to the flight line. The Blackhawk sat waiting under portable lights. Crew chiefs performed final checks. Voss opened the cargo bay and began her pre-flight inspection. Medical kits secured with triple redundant straps, ammunition crates locked down, fire extinguisher accessible. Everything by regulation. Everything perfect. Captain Trent arrived at 2:10 a.m., flight suit crisp, helmet under his arm. He walked past Voss without acknowledgement. Marsh followed, laughing at something on his phone. Cole nodded at her once. That was more than most gave her. At 2:14 a.m., Trent's voice came through the internal communication system. "Crew check. We're rolling in 90 seconds. Everyone confirm status." "Co-pilot ready?" Marsh replied immediately. "Flight engineer ready," Cole confirmed. "Cargo ready," Voss said quietly into her headset. Nobody responded. It was like she hadn't spoken at all. At 2:16 a.m., the UH-60 Blackhawk lifted off into a moonless sky. The main rotor beat the air with its distinctive sound. Voss sat on the troop bench in the cargo bay, hands on her knees, feeling every vibration through the airframe. They flew low, following terrain contours, staying below radar coverage. The flight path took them over the Turkish-Syrian border at 2:28 a.m. No turning back now. They were in hostile territory. Every second counted. Voss closed her eyes and tried to control her breathing. In through the nose, out through the mouth, the same technique the therapist had taught her. It didn't help. Her hands were shaking inside the gloves. The scars felt tight. The sound of the rotors brought back memories she'd spent 8 months trying to suppress. Kandahar. The fire. The screaming. "You good back there, cargo?" Cole's voice in her headset. "I'm good," she lied. The flight continued, 32 minutes, 35, 40. At 2:43 a.m., Captain Trent's voice cut through the ambient noise. "Approaching extraction point. 4 minutes out. Everyone stay sharp. We're getting intel that the area might be hotter than expected." The Blackhawk banked left, beginning its spiral descent toward the landing zone. Voss knew the maneuver without looking. Spiral approach. Minimize time exposed to ground fire. Standard procedure for high-threat environments. Trent was executing it correctly, but she'd noticed things over the past 8 months of flying with him. Small things. The way he pulled too much collective on takeoff, wasting fuel. The way he overcompensated in crosswinds instead of letting the aircraft stabilize naturally. The way he relied too heavily on instruments instead of trusting his instincts. Mistakes that didn't matter in peacetime. Mistakes that could kill you in combat. She'd never said anything. She wasn't a pilot anymore. She was cargo. They descended through 9,000 feet. The landing zone was coming up fast. Voss could see it through the open cargo door. A dirt field surrounded by low buildings. Dark. Quiet. Too quiet. At 2:46 a.m. and 34 seconds, everything went wrong. The rocket-propelled grenade launch came from a rooftop 200 meters east of the planned landing zone. Danger close. The shooter had taken a high-risk shot from an exposed position. Intelligence had missed the weapons cache entirely. The contractors on the ground hadn't spotted the fighter in the darkness. The RPG streaked through the night sky and struck the Blackhawk's tail boom with catastrophic force. The warhead detonated, shredding the tail rotor assembly and severing hydraulic lines. The helicopter yawed violently to the right. Every alarm in the cockpit activated simultaneously. Master caution lights, hydraulic failure warnings, tail rotor malfunction indicators. The cockpit became a nightmare of red lights and screaming alerts. "RPG! We're hit! We're hit!" Marsh's voice cracked with panic over the radio. Then the secondary shrapnel came through the shattered cockpit glass. Fragments of metal tore through the cabin. Marsh jerked forward against his 4-point harness as something struck him in the neck and shoulder. Blood sprayed across the instrument panel. His head dropped forward, unconscious, possibly dead. "Marsh is down!" Trent screamed into the radio, his voice breaking. "I've lost tail rotor authority. I've lost hydraulics. We're spinning. Mayday, 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 Havoc 2-1 is going down." The Blackhawk entered an uncontrolled right spin. The main rotor's torque, no longer counteracted by the tail rotor, took over completely. The aircraft spun faster, and faster. 8,000 feet altitude, 7,800, 7,500, spinning at 35 degrees per second. Then 40, then 45. The centrifugal force pinned everyone against the cabin walls. Equipment tore loose from inadequate tie-downs. A medical kit slammed into the bulkhead and exploded, scattering supplies. Voss felt herself pressed against the troop bench, unable to move. This was it. This was Kandahar all over again. The fire, the crash, the screaming. Her hands started shaking uncontrollably. But then something shifted inside her. Some part of her brain that had been dormant for 8 months suddenly woke up. Training. Muscle memory. 500 flight hours. 73 combat missions before they grounded her. Emergency procedures drilled into her until they became reflex. She wasn't cargo anymore. She was a pilot. And pilots don't quit. Voss ripped off her gloves. The burn scars were fully visible now, pink and shiny under the red emergency lights. She unbuckled her harness and pushed herself up, fighting 800 pounds of centrifugal force trying to pin her to the wall. "Stay in your seat!" Cole screamed at her from his position near the gun mount. She ignored him. The Blackhawk was spinning at 50 degrees per second now. At this rate, they had maybe 30 seconds before they hit the ground. Voss grabbed the ceiling-mounted handrail and pulled herself forward, hand over hand, fighting the G-forces, moving toward the cockpit. 6,000 feet. 5,800. "I can't stop the spin!" Trent's voice over the intercom. Pure terror. "Mayday, mayday, mayday, Havoc 2-1 is going down. We are going down." Voss reached the cockpit threshold. Marsh was slumped forward against his harness, blood pooling in his lap, dripping onto the floor. Trent had both hands locked on the cyclic stick, pulling back with all his strength, trying to force the nose up. It wasn't working. Nothing was working. "Get back to your seat!" Trent shouted when he saw her. 5,000 feet, 4,700. The ground was rushing up at them. 25 seconds to impact. "I have the aircraft," Voss said. Her voice was steady, calm, cold. The voice of someone who had done this before. "You don't have the authority. You're not rated. I have the aircraft." She reached past Marsh's unconscious body and grabbed the collective lever with her left hand and the cyclic control stick with her right. Her scarred hands moved over the controls with absolute certainty. Trent stared at her for 1 second. He saw the scars. He saw the way her fingers found every switch and lever without hesitation. He saw something in her eyes that made him let go. 4,000 feet. The Blackhawk was spinning at 55 degrees per second. Terminal spin. Unrecoverable by any standard training manual. Except Voss knew something the training manual didn't teach. She'd lived through this exact scenario in Kandahar. Different cause, same result. And she'd survived. Her mind shifted into a state of absolute clarity. Time seemed to slow down. Every alarm, every sensation became hyper-focused. She could feel the aircraft through the controls. No tail rotor meant no anti-torque authority. The main rotor's torque was spinning the fuselage like a top. Increasing RPM meant increasing spin rate. The only way to stop it was to eliminate the torque. She slammed the collective lever down to the floor, reducing power to the main rotor to absolute minimum. The spin rate slowed fractionally. 50 degrees per second. 45. 40. 3,500 feet. But they were dropping like a stone now. 1,500 feet per minute descent rate. 2,500. She rolled the throttle control to flight idle, cutting engine power almost completely. The Blackhawk fell faster, but the spin continued to decelerate. 35 degrees per second. 28. "You're gonna kill us all," Cole's voice from the cargo bay, terror-stricken. 15 degrees per second. 3,000 feet. She needed forward airspeed. Translational lift. Aerodynamic anti-torque from sideways movement through the air. She pushed the cyclic stick forward aggressively, nosing the helicopter down into a steep dive. The spin rate dropped further. 12 degrees per second. 8. 5. The Blackhawk stopped spinning. 2,500 feet. Steady. Level. Falling fast, but controllable. "Where's the landing zone?" she demanded, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Coordinates locked. 2 kilometers north," Cole answered, his voice shaking. "Heavy ground fire reported in that sector. We don't have fuel for alternatives. We don't have time. We're going in." Voss adjusted the collective carefully, adding just enough power to control the descent without restarting the spin. It was a razor's edge. Too much power, and the torque would spin them to death. Too little power, and they'd crater into the ground at terminal velocity. 1,800 feet. She could see muzzle flashes on the ground now. Tracer rounds arcing through the darkness. The landing zone was hot. The extraction had gone completely sideways. The safe house was under attack, and they were flying a crippled helicopter straight into an active firefight. "Havoc 2-1, this is Atlas Control. Say status and position." Cole grabbed the radio handset. "Atlas Control, Havoc 2-1 is combat damaged, making emergency landing in hostile territory. Co-pilot is critical. We need immediate quick reaction force support. Copy Havoc 2-1. QRF is wheels up in 3 minutes. Hold position." 3 minutes plus flight time. They had to survive on the ground in hostile territory with a crippled aircraft, wounded crew, and enemy fighters closing in. 1,200 feet. Voss brought the Blackhawk down in a controlled dive, trading altitude for airspeed, bleeding off velocity at the last possible moment. Without tail rotor authority, she couldn't perform a proper flare maneuver. This was going to be a hard landing. Very hard. 800 feet. 600. 400. "Brace for impact." Everyone brace. 200 feet. The ground rushed up at them. 100 feet. She pulled back on the cyclic and added a burst of collective at the last possible second. The Blackhawk's descent slowed, but not enough. 50 feet. 20 feet. Impact. The helicopter slammed into the desert floor at 2:49 a.m. with bone-shattering force. The main landing gear took most of it, compressing fully, but the left skid buckled under the lateral stress. Metal screamed. The airframe twisted 15 degrees. The windscreen that was still intact shattered completely. Equipment broke loose in the cargo bay, but they were down, on the ground. Alive. For now. The gunfire started before the rotors stopped spinning. Voss could hear it through the damaged cockpit, sharp cracks of AK-47s mixing with the deeper thump of a PKM machine gun. They'd landed in a hot zone. Very hot. She kept her hands on the controls for 3 more seconds, ensuring the aircraft was stable, then hit the engine shutdown switch. The turbines began to wind down. "Get Marsh out! Secure a perimeter! Move, move, move! Cole was already moving. He unbuckled Marsh's harness, and 2 crew chiefs appeared from the cargo bay to help. They dragged the unconscious co-pilot out through the side door. Blood trail on the deck. Too much blood. Captain Trent sat frozen in his seat, both hands still gripping the collective lever even though the aircraft was on the ground. His eyes were wide, unfocused. Combat shock. Voss had seen it before. She grabbed his shoulder hard. "Captain? I need you functional. We have wounded and we're taking fire." He didn't respond. She slapped him, hard, across the face. His head snapped to the side and something cleared in his eyes. We crashed. We landed. Now we fight. You with me? He nodded slowly. I'm with you. Good. Grab your weapon and help Cole set up a defensive position. Trent unbuckled and stumbled out of the cockpit. Voss pulled her M4 carbine from its mount and followed. The landing zone was worse than she'd expected. They'd come down in an empty lot surrounded by 3-story buildings on all sides. Urban terrain. Terrible for defense. Good for ambush. The 12 contractors they were supposed to extract were pinned down behind a concrete wall 60 meters to the north. She could see muzzle flashes from their position. They were returning fire, but couldn't move. At least 3 enemy positions had them triangulated. The PKM machine gun was firing from a rooftop to the east, the same position the RPG had come from. Someone was smart over there. Disciplined. Not just militia. Voss dropped behind the Blackhawk's landing gear and assessed the situation. Cole was frantically setting up their M240 machine gun on the west side of the aircraft, hands moving fast despite the incoming fire. 2 crew chiefs had taken position at the rear. Trent was checking Marsh's wounds. The co-pilot was still unconscious but breathing. The neck wound had been packed with gauze, but he needed surgery. Soon. She keyed her radio. Atlas Control, Havoc 2-1 is on the ground. We are taking effective fire from multiple positions. We need that QRF now. Copy Havoc 2-1. QRF is airborne. ETA 4 minutes to your position. 4 minutes. 240 seconds. An eternity in combat. A burst of automatic fire stitched across the Blackhawk's fuselage. Rounds punched through the thin aluminum skin. Someone screamed. One of the crew chiefs went down, grabbing his leg. "Man down!" Cole shouted. Voss ran in a crouch to the wounded crew chief, shrapnel in his thigh. Not arterial, but painful. She grabbed a pressure bandage from her kit and wrapped it tight. "You're okay. Stay down. Return fire when you can." The crew chief nodded, teeth clenched. The PKM opened up again. Long burst, disciplined, 5 to 7 round bursts. Whoever was on that gun knew what they were doing. The rounds walked across the Blackhawk from tail to nose. Cole ducked behind the landing gear. "That gun's gonna shred us." Voss scanned the rooftop. 300 meters, maybe 320. The PKM was partially concealed behind a low wall. She could see the muzzle flash, but not the shooter. "Cole!" "Suppressive fire on that rooftop. I'm moving to get a better angle." "You can't." She was already moving. Voss sprinted 20 meters to the right, using a burned-out car for cover. The angle was better here. She could see more of the rooftop. The PKM gunner was visible now. Chest and head exposed when he leaned into the gun. She raised her M4, flipped the selector to semi-auto, and aimed. Breathe. Squeeze. The rifle bucked. The PKM went silent. "Guns down!" she called out. But 2 more fighters appeared on the same rooftop, dragging the dead gunner away and setting up again. Persistent. Voss fired 3 more rounds. One fighter dropped. The other ducked behind cover. She reloaded. Her hands moved automatically. Muscle memory. The burn scars didn't hurt anymore. Adrenaline. The contractors 60 meters away were trying to move. She could see them through the darkness. 12 shapes. 2 were helping a third who was limping. Wounded. They needed to reach the Blackhawk, but the machine gun position had them pinned. "Cole! Lay down suppressive fire! Get those contractors moving!" Cole opened up with the M240. Long, sustained burst. Tracers arcing toward the rooftop. The enemy fighters ducked. It gave the contractors a window. They ran. All 12 sprinted across the open ground. 60 meters. 50. 40. Enemy fire erupted from a new position. A doorway on the south side. 2 fighters with AKS. Voss pivoted and engaged. 3-round burst. Both fighters went down. 30 meters. 20. The contractors reached the Blackhawk and dove behind the landing gear, gasping. "Who's in charge?" Voss demanded. A man in his 40s, beard, tactical vest, answered between breaths. "I am." Mitchell, CIA. "You're blown. We need to get everyone on the bird and get out of here." Mitchell looked at the Blackhawk. The tail boom was shredded. Hydraulic fluid leaked onto the ground. The tail rotor was gone completely. "That thing's not flying anywhere." "It will if I fly it." Mitchell stared at her. "Your cargo crew." "Not tonight." Another burst of machine gun fire. The second PKM gunner had taken over. Rounds slammed into the Blackhawk's fuselage. Someone screamed. One of the contractors grabbed his arm. Flesh wound. Voss keyed her radio. "Atlas Control, Havoc 2-1, what's the status on that QRF?" "Havoc 2-1, QRF is inbound. ETA 2 minutes, but they're reporting ground fire on approach. They may not be able to land in your location. 2 minutes, and they might not make it. Voss made a decision. Everyone listen up. We're getting on this aircraft, and we're taking off in 90 seconds. "That bird can't fly," Mitchell shouted. "It can fly. It just can't turn right. Everyone on board now. Trent, get in the left seat. Cole, get that M240 inside and set up for door gun position." The crew moved. Fast. Combat trained. The contractors helped load Marsh into the cargo bay. The wounded crew chief limped aboard. Trent climbed into the pilot's seat. His hands were shaking, but he was functional. Voss climbed into the right seat, the co-pilot position. Marsh's blood was still wet on the instrument panel. She grabbed the radio headset and put it on. "Everyone strapped in?" "Cargo bay secure," Cole called back. Voss hit the battery switch. Electrical systems came online. Warning lights illuminated the cockpit like a Christmas tree. Hydraulic failure. Tail rotor failure. Caution warnings. She ignored them all. Starting engine. She rolled the throttle to ground idle. The turbine began to spin, slow at first, then faster. The characteristic whine building. 10% RPM. 20. 30. Outside, the enemy fire intensified. They knew the helicopter was starting up. They were trying to disable it before it could take off. Rounds punched through the cargo bay. Someone yelled. 50% RPM. 60. The main rotor began to turn. Slowly. Building speed. "We're not going to make it," Trent said, his voice tight. "Yes, we are." 70%. RPM. 80. The rotor was at flying speed now, but the aircraft was damaged. Tail rotor gone, hydraulics failing. This wasn't going to be a normal takeoff. This was going to be a barely controlled crash in the opposite direction. Cole, when we lift off, lay down everything you have on that rooftop. Everyone else, brace for extreme maneuvering. 90% RPM, 100. Full power. Voss pulled collective. The Blackhawk shuddered, groaned. Metal scraped against metal somewhere in the damaged airframe. Then, impossibly, they lifted off. 1 foot, 2 feet, 5 feet. The moment they left the ground, the helicopter began to spin. Yaw to the right, uncontrollable. No tail rotor to stop it. Voss had planned for this. She pushed the cyclic forward aggressively. The nose dropped. They accelerated forward, building airspeed. 20 knots. 30. At 35 knots, translational lift began to take effect. At 40 knots, they had full translational lift. The helicopter stopped sinking. They were flying. Sort of. Spinning slowly to the right. 5 degrees per second. 10. But they were flying. Cole opened up with the M240. Long, sustained burst. Tracers poured into the rooftop position. The enemy fire slackened. Havoc 2-1 is airborne. We are combat damaged and cannot maintain controlled flight. We need immediate assistance. Copy Havoc 2-1. QRF has you in sight. They're escorting you out. Voss pushed the cyclic forward harder, building speed. 50 knots. 60. The faster they went, the more stable they became. Aerodynamic forces partially counteracting the torque. But they were spinning. Slowly. Continuously. The world rotated around them. Buildings. Desert. Sky. Buildings. Desert. Sky. Where are we going? Trent asked. His voice was steadier now. Focused. North. Away from the city. QRF can cover us once we're clear of the urban terrain. They flew low. Dangerously low. 50 feet above the ground. Voss couldn't climb higher. More altitude meant more time to spin out of control if something went wrong. The Blackhawk rotated slowly. 15 degrees per second now. They were picking up spin rate as they climbed. I need more forward speed, Voss said. Can we handle it? We don't have a choice. She pushed the cyclic forward more. 70 knots. 80. The helicopter vibrated badly. Damaged components screaming in protest. But they were moving away from the city. Behind them, she could see the QRF helicopters. 2 more Blackhawks in formation. They were firing at ground targets, suppressing the enemy fighters, covering the extraction. 90 knots. The spin was up to 20 degrees per second. The horizon rotated continuously. Voss's hands were locked on the controls, every muscle in her body tensed, compensating, adjusting, fighting the aircraft. This was exactly like Kandahar, but worse. In Kandahar, she'd only had to land. Now she had to fly. How long can we maintain this? Trent asked. Until we find a safe place to put down, or until something breaks. Something broke. A loud bang from the engine compartment. The turbine RPM dropped. 95%. 90. We're losing power, Trent called out. Transferring to emergency power. Voss flipped switches. The backup hydraulic system engaged. Partial authority returned to the controls, but the engine continued to lose power. 85% RPM. 80, 75. They were going down, again. I need a landing zone. Anything flat. There. Trent pointed ahead. A section of desert. Flat. Open. 200 meters ahead. Cole, tell everyone to brace again. This is going to be rough. Voss aimed for the flat section. The Blackhawk was spinning faster now, 30 degrees per second. She had no tail rotor, no hydraulics, failing engine. This wasn't a landing. This was a controlled crash. 100 meters. 50. She cut power completely. The helicopter dropped. The spin slowed as the torque decreased. 20 degrees per second. 10. They hit the ground hard, harder than the first landing. The right landing gear collapsed. The Blackhawk tilted 30 degrees and skidded sideways across the sand. Metal screamed. Sparks flew. They slid for 30 meters before grinding to a stop. Silence. Then, chaos. Everyone out! Out of the aircraft. It could catch fire. Voss unbuckled and stumbled out of the cockpit. Her legs were shaking. Adrenaline crash. Cole and the contractors were dragging Marsh out of the cargo bay. The wounded crew chief limped out on his own. Trent climbed out of the left seat and stood next to Voss. They both stared at the wrecked helicopter. The entire tail boom was bent at a 45-degree angle. The main rotor blades were cracked. Hydraulic fluid pooled underneath. That shouldn't have flown, Trent said quietly. No, it shouldn't have. The QRF Blackhawks landed 30 meters away. Medics rushed out with stretchers. Within minutes, Marsh and the wounded were loaded onto the rescue birds. Mitchell, the CIA contractor, walked over to Voss. I need your name and rank. Specialist Ilara Voss, cargo crew, Havoc 2-1. Mitchell stared at her for a long moment. Cargo crew. That's what my file says. Cargo crew doesn't fly. Cargo crew doesn't execute a spin recovery at 8,000 feet. Cargo crew doesn't take off from a hot LZ with no tail rotor. Voss didn't respond. She was staring at her hands. The gloves were gone, lost somewhere during the chaos. The burn scars were fully visible in the moonlight. Mitchell saw them. He saw the way she held her hands, the slight tremor, the aftermath of combat stress. What happened to you? He asked quietly. Kandahar, Voss said, 8 months ago. Captain Trent appeared. He'd overheard. You flew in Kandahar? Voss nodded. What was your call sign? She hesitated. Then, quietly, Reaper. The name hung in the air. Trent's eyes widened. Reaper? You're Reaper? The Reaper from Kandahar? Was, not anymore. Mitchell pulled out a tablet and typed quickly. His security clearance was high enough to access classified files. What he found made him go very still. Captain Trent, you should read this. Trent took the tablet. His face changed as he read. Shock. Then understanding. Then something like shame. When he looked up at Voss, it was different. Respectful. Almost reverent. You were the pilot who flew 23 consecutive combat missions in Kandahar. The one who held the record for most extractions under fire. That was a long time ago, Voss said. 8 months. It says here you were shot down. Engine failure after taking an RPG to the tail boom. You landed the aircraft with no tail rotor, saved your entire crew, then went back in 3 times to extract wounded from the crash site, while the aircraft was on fire. That's how you got those scars. Voss didn't respond. The memory was too fresh, too painful. It also says you were grounded. Medical discharge. Psychological evaluation determined you were unfit for flight duties due to post-traumatic stress disorder. I froze, Voss said quietly. After Kandahar, they put me back in a cockpit and I froze. Couldn't fly. Couldn't even touch the controls without shaking. So they grounded me, reassigned me to cargo. Trent was reading more. Your call sign was Reaper because you never left anyone behind. 23 missions, 147 personnel extracted from hostile territory, 0 fatalities on your watch. The QRF commander, a major, walked over. We need to move. Enemy forces are regrouping. We're wheels up in 2 minutes. Understood, Mitchell said. He turned to Voss. You're coming with us. I'm assigned to Havoc 2-1. Havoc 2-1 doesn't exist anymore. He gestured at the wrecked helicopter. You just saved 12 CIA assets, 1 critically wounded co-pilot and 4 crew members. You flew a helicopter with no tail rotor, twice. That's going in my report. And I'm guessing a lot of people are going to want to talk to you. Voss looked at Trent. The captain stepped forward. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. I'm sorry we didn't know. I'm sorry we called you cargo. I'm sorry we didn't listen. You didn't know, Voss said simply. But I do now. And I'm putting you in for a commendation. What you did tonight. That was the best flying I've ever seen, under the worst conditions imaginable. Mitchell nodded. I'm recommending you for the Distinguished Flying Cross, and I'm going to personally make sure your medical clearance is reviewed. Someone who can do what you just did shouldn't be loading crates. I don't know if I can fly again, Voss said. After tonight, I mean. This was survival. I don't know if I can do it again without the fear? Mitchell interrupted. Without the shaking? Without remembering Kandahar? Yes, you just did it twice, under fire, in a crippled aircraft. I'd say you've already proven you can. The QRF commander called out again. Time to move, people! They boarded the rescue Blackhawk. Voss sat in the cargo bay next to Marsh, who was stabilized but still unconscious. Cole sat across from her. He extended his hand. I owe you an apology, too. We all do. She shook his hand. You didn't know. We should have asked. We should have wondered why someone who moved like you, talked like you, held herself like you, was loading crates. The Blackhawk lifted off. Voss looked out the open door as they climbed. Below, she could see the wreckage of Havoc 2-1, the helicopter she'd crashed. Twice. And kept everyone alive. The helicopter they'd called unflyable. The same helicopter she'd refused to give up on. Just like Kandahar. She'd refused to give up then, too. Even when her hands were burning. Even when the fire was everywhere. She'd pulled her crew out. She'd gone back in 3 times. Until everyone was safe. That's what Reaper meant. No one left behind? The QRF Blackhawk banked north, heading back to Turkish airspace. Safe. Voss closed her eyes and let the vibration of the rotors wash over her. It didn't trigger the panic attack she expected. It didn't bring back the nightmares. Instead, it felt familiar, like coming home. Her hands still had the scars. They always would. But maybe that was okay. Maybe the scars weren't a reminder of failure. Maybe they were proof of survival. Proof that she'd faced the fire and come out the other side. Captain Trent's voice came through her headset. He'd moved to the cockpit of the QRF Bird. Voss? Yes, sir. When we get back to base, we're going to have a conversation. About getting you back in the cockpit, officially. I don't know if I'm ready. You just flew a helicopter with no tail rotor through a combat zone. Twice. If that's not ready, I don't know what is. The flight back to Turkey took 40 minutes. When they landed at Forward Operating Base Atlas at 3:47 a.m., there were people waiting. Medical teams took Marsh directly to surgery. The prognosis was good. He'd survive. The wounded crew chief would recover fully. The contractors were debriefed immediately. Mitchell's report would go up the chain of command within hours. And Voss? She was escorted to the operations center, where a colonel she'd never met was waiting. "Specialist Voss, sit down." She sat. Her flight suit was covered in blood. Not hers. Marsh's. The colonel slid a file across the desk. "This is your personnel file. As of 8 months ago, you were deemed unfit for flight duties. As of 3 hours ago, you executed a spin recovery that should have been impossible, landed a crippled aircraft in a hot zone, took off again with no tail rotor, and flew 7 miles through hostile territory before landing safely." "Explain that." "I had 4 seconds to decide," Voss said. "Stay cargo or become a pilot again." "And you chose pilot." "I chose not to let anyone die." The colonel leaned back. "The medical board that grounded you. They said you froze during a training flight, that you couldn't handle the stress. They were right. I couldn't. Not then." "And now?" Voss looked at her hands. The scars. The tremor was almost gone. Almost. "Now I know that fear doesn't mean you're broken. It means you remember what can go wrong, and sometimes remembering is what keeps you alive." The colonel nodded slowly. "I'm ordering a full review of your case. In the meantime, you're on leave. Mandatory psychological evaluation. And when you're cleared, and you will be cleared, we're putting you back in the cockpit. That's an order." 2 months later, after extensive psychological evaluation and medical review, Specialist Ilara Voss stood on the flight line at Forward Operating Base Atlas. She was wearing a flight suit. Not cargo fatigues. A flight suit. Her hands were steady. Mostly. A UH-60 Blackhawk sat waiting. New. Undamaged. Perfect. Captain Trent walked up beside her. "You ready?" "I don't know," she admitted. "That's honest. But here's what I know. You're the best pilot I've ever seen, and we need you." Voss climbed into the cockpit. The right seat, co-pilot, for now. She put on the helmet. Her hands found the controls. The muscle memory was still there. The burn scars didn't hurt. She keyed the radio. "Havoc 2-1, ready for start." "Copy Havoc 2-1. You're cleared. And for the first time since Kandahar, Specialist Ilara Voss, callsign Reaper, felt like a pilot again. Not cargo, not broken. Just a pilot who'd learned that sometimes the hardest flights aren't the ones where you crash. They're the ones where you have to climb back in and fly again." They lifted off into a clear morning sky. And below, painted on the side of the new Blackhawk, was a small addition. A Reaper symbol. And beneath it, a single word. Unbreakable.